Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Away and Awake, or welcome for the first time, as I imagine it will be for many of you. Thanks for being here. Let me just, as a piece of housekeeping, mention that I'm using the native microphone on my phone today, not my phone, on my computer, because the cable on my regular mic has died. So hopefully the audio quality is okay. Now, this video I'd like to discuss my recent attendance at the International Association for the Study of Dreams annual conference in the Netherlands, Rolduc Abbey, an amazing place in the south of the Netherlands, right on the border with Germany. And if you've watched the channel before, you may have seen me talk about, do my kind of pre-trip discussion about this and some of the things that were motivating me to get there. And so this is going to be a brief debrief on the conference and what I took from it. I have debated whether I should try to structure this more carefully, like write a script, etc., for it, rather than just speaking off the cuff. That can be hard to get myself motivated around, but also it can be useful, I find, often for myself to speak off the cuff for in the beginning with a topic to structure my own thoughts. Even if maybe I'll do this video, I won't publish it, but it's given me an opportunity to flesh out a few ideas. I find it easier, I think, to think in speaking than to think in thinking. But yeah, I wanted to talk about what I've taken away from the conference, and it's more or less lined up with the expectations I went in with. So there were three kind of key things that I thought I would get from being there. One was that I imagined I would meet some pretty amazing people, and that indeed was true, and not just amazing, but also some people who, I think emotionally significant to me, and I think will be important people in my life moving forward as friends. Also got to meet a few luminaries from the dream world, the Robert Wagners of the world, etc. So that was very excellent. The second thing was that I imagined that it would be quite a broad church of people at that event, and therefore there'd be a broad sweep of interesting things to listen to on the topic of dreams, from the kind of creative side through to the technical side, and indeed some more kind of philosophical meta discussions around consciousness more broadly, and AI, which it turned out there were some discussions around. And so that was all very cool. And the third thing was that I knew that I was going in with my broad position when it comes to dream interpretation is that it doesn't resonate with me as a very useful practice when it comes to, well, it not being the most powerful way to work with one's dreams, the most powerful thing that one can get from the experience of dreaming, or indeed the most powerful way of understanding the nature of dreaming or the phenomenon of it. So I went in with that view, and if you've watched the channel before, you may be aware that nothing that I've done on the channel has had to do with dream interpretation. I've studiously steered away from that. And I've been having highly, highly unusual dreams for a decade, and never in that time have I ever erred towards interpreting dream content. And so going to the conference, I knew that this was going to be challenged because there would be a large contingent of people and indeed activities and sessions that related to dream work and dream interpretation. And so I was concerned that I might find that kind of quite challenging to have to kind of sit through and be exposed to. But that also I might find it interesting, and indeed you never know, I might be persuaded that I've been short-sighted in my opposition to it. And that's the kind of main thing that I want to talk about today. Needless to say, the conference was incredible. As I said, some really interesting talks. I met some amazing people. Venue was beautiful. And I'm definitely encouraged to continue attending these kinds of events in the future. But I wanted to kind of really talk about this question of dream interpretation. Because as it turns out, I've come away from the conference even more convinced of my general stance on dream interpretation, which is that I don't find it a compelling and powerful way to meaningfully engage with dreams. Now, there's some caveats to that, but it's a complex discussion, but that's basically the position. And so I'm less inclined than ever to engage in dream work or dream interpretation as it's normally understood. And the challenge for me now is to unpack for myself precisely why that is and why that position has been fortified by what I witnessed at the conference. And in the absence of dream interpretation as a major mode of engaging with dreams, what do I propose for myself and anyone else would be some ways that one could engage with dreams? What are the offerings that are available through dreams, if any at all? How can we think about dreams, etc.? And I have lots of answers to those questions kind of subtly dispersed around my brain, but not especially well articulated necessarily. And so I'd like to start a conversation with myself, but also potentially with this audience that may or may not be out there watching this video around this question. And I feel slightly uncomfortable and awkward with it because I know that most likely anyone who is watching this video and has gotten this far must have some interest in dreams, and quite often that means that they also have an interest in dream interpretation and that it is quite important to them. And certainly that is true, it seems, of the conference. A very sizable number of people at the conference, dream work, I think, would be something that they see as central to their work around their own dreams. So it's an awkward one because I don't want to put myself at odds with them, and I certainly don't want to speak disrespectfully towards what is obviously interesting and valuable to them. And I don't want to dispute that it is valuable to them. But I do want to try to make a case, to make my case, even if it's just from the point of view of understanding myself, around where I think that's a limited approach to thinking about dreams. And in some cases, I think actually detrimental as well. So that's my starting point for the discussion. Now, as I said, this is kind of off the cuff at this point, so we'll see how I go. But I thought that at least I had a starting point for the video, and I should have actually looked this up before I got going. So let me just bring this up. And in fact, if I was real clever, I would have brought it up in such a way that I could bring it up on screen for you. Now, maybe I'll pause and organize that. 1 second. Okay, professionalism. Right. Oh, and there we go. Just as I start this back up again, it decides to throw me an ad, so let's get rid of that. I think this is an interesting starting point for the discussion for me. It just dawned on me the other day, the significance of this. This is a line, or a number of lines, from a poem by poet David Whyte from the UK, who I've been a big fan of for about a decade now. And this is from one of my favorite of his poems, and this is possibly the favorite stanza, if we want to call it that, of his that I could think of off the top of my head. And it's kind of cemented itself just recently, this last week, when it dawned on me just how significant this is to the question I have around dreams. So the line goes, years ago in the Hebrides, I remember an old man who walked every morning on the grey stones to the shore of the baying seals, who would press his hat to his chest in the blustering salt wind and say his prayer to the turbulent Jesus hidden in the water. That last line there, it would say his prayer to the turbulent Jesus hidden in the water, to me is just absolute gold. It's a wonderful piece of poetry and philosophy and insight into the nature of things and the nature of the human condition. And this popped into my head when having a discussion with my psychologist recently, who, as it turns out, is actually an enthusiast around dreams. He's a wizened old man with many stories to tell about all sorts of different traditions and his own experience with very complex states of consciousness and dreams. and indeed himself someone who has spent much time doing dream work. And this came up, this popped up into my mind, and I suddenly realized just how much this has to say about where I stand on dreams. So, years ago in the Hebrides, I remember an old man who walked every morning on the grey stones to the shore obeying seals, who would press his hat to his chest in the blustering salt wind and say his prayer to the turbulent Jesus hidden in the water. Now, that last few lines really sum this up for me and say a lot. So, say his prayer to the turbulent Jesus hidden in the water. This, if I could embody a way of engaging with my dreams, it would be defined, I think, by this line. And I would argue that this line runs completely contrary to ideas of dream interpretation. So we have this turbulent Jesus hidden in the water. Jesus here, obviously a biblical symbol, but more broadly and generically and philosophically, a symbol of the creation of all things, the starting point, the mystery underneath it all. That Jesus character, that Jesus phenomenon in this context is turbulent. It's not clear, it's not simple, it's not clear cut, it's not still, it's moving in unpredictable ways, it is turbulent. On top of that, it's hidden. It's hidden in the water. It's not there to be seen, even in its turbulence. It's under the water. It's obscured by the water, even on top of its native kind of state of turbulence. So this kind of this thing that is going on, that we kind of, well, let's try to use the I terminology here, that some sort of yearning I have for getting to the heart of things, for understanding something more deep about myself and about reality and about my dreams, etc. This is this fairly opaque phenomenon. And opaque's not really quite the right word. We really need that combination of both hidden and turbulent. So to start off with, just taking note that little section there, I would equate dreams, not exactly equate, but I would frame dreams in a similar way, and all the more so complex dreams. So non-ordinary, often lucid, but primarily the key word being non-ordinary. So deeply strange states of awareness, with novel physics, with novel conceptions, novel emotions, novel sensations, things that are impossible to experience in waking consciousness, and that on the surface of it have nothing at all to do with the waking world, because some of them are completely discontinuous with the waking world. I think this would be a good way of characterizing those states. Not only are they turbulent experiences hidden underneath something, but they are equivalent in terms of what's the word I'm trying to look for? They have a Jesusness about them. They seem to be a pointer to this deep, ineffable, mysterious underlying source, if we want to call it that. And moreover, dreams are possibly one of very few places that you could really call that in conscious experience. I think in waking consciousness, at least for me, it's very rare to come across anything that seems to point so profoundly at that underlying thing. I think in most people's experience, especially those who've had these complex dreams, that would be the experience you would point to as saying, I came very, very close, into very close contact with something very, very deep. This is also something that that comes up in altered states through psychedelics, etc. as well. So first of all, I want to kind of just make that point that I think that this turbulent Jesus hidden in the water is a decent kind of way of describing what dreams are and how we could conceptualize them. And that description runs contrary to ideas of translating symbols from dreams into waking world ideas, etc. And that ineffability, that turbulence, that hiddenness of it is precisely what defines it as sacred. If it was not turbulent, if it was not hidden, if it could be transcribed and shown to the world, then that would not be the sacred space. I think as the line goes, when you believe that you know the Tao, you don't know the Tao. Now, a critical piece comes into this further to that, which is this question of prayer. So, years ago in the Hebrides, I remember an old man who walked every morning on the grey stones to the shore of baying seals, who would press his hat to his chest in the blustering salt wind and say his prayer to the turbulent Jesus hidden in the water. Now have a look at what's going on here. We've got this old man in the Hebrides, which is in Scotland, a very relentless environment, who walked every morning, this old man walked on grey stones to the shore of baying seals and press his hat to his chest in the blustering salt wind. So this is an unforgiving situation. But he is determined every morning to make that walk, to put his hat to his chest despite the wind, because he knows of the turbulent Jesus hidden in the water, and he knows that what is needed, the approach needed between him and that, is a posture of prayer. This to me, again, if we consider dream interpretation as a response to dream phenomena and dream content, and I kind of keep it reiterating, but in particular deep, very strange or very profound dream content, it's kind of transcendent experiences, which really seem more than anything to point towards something very profound underneath. Is dream interpretation a prayer? And is it a prayer of this nature? And I don't believe that it is. And it was quite profound for me to really realize how closely this connects in with my feeling about dreams and dream interpretation. By definition, the sacred is ineffable, hidden, turbulent, strange, ungraspable, undrawable, unwritable, which I think are all adjectives that do not apply to dream interpretation. And the appropriate response to such profound experience, in the case of this poem, is prayer. And prayer that's been arrived at through a very, very arduous process that the man's been prepared to submit himself to because of the deep significance that he sees in this strange, unsayable thing hidden in the water. Strange, unsayable Jesus hidden in the water. And so what is prayer here? Well, in this case, the prayer is the process of getting himself to the place where he can engage with the turbulent Jesus, to go through that arduous walk. And then it is standing with his hat to his chest and saying his prayer. Now, putting one's hat to one's chest and saying a prayer to the turbulent Jesus, this is not describing the Jesus. He's not attempting in any way, shape, or form to describe the Jesus. He's doing exactly what you would imagine the response to a genuinely sacred place or a godlike figure would be, which is to submit, to be deferent, to be humble, to fall to one's knees in awe of its profundity and its power and its strength and its divinity. And again, is this equivalent to dream interpretation? Is that what the act of dream interpretation is doing? And I don't think that it is. Now let me catch my thoughts for a second, because I think there's something more that I want to emphasize in this. Press his hat to his chest in the blustering salt wind and say his prayer to the turbulent Jesus hidden in the water. Say his prayer. Something about this saying of the prayer. Yeah. It's not simply that he feels, or let's say I feel, that this Jesus hidden in the water as an entity in itself is deserving of or demands that we pray for out of respect or whatever it is, so that it's not that the Jesus under the water is requiring this of us for its own benefit. And again, by definition, the sacred does not need, it doesn't require of us anything. It's this source of infinite sustenance and wisdom. So why is he saying a prayer? And it's because he recognizes that that is the way that he can engage, and by extension his life can be shaped by the turbulent Jesus hidden in the water, is by the act of prayer. So that it's an act of self-interest to say this prayer to that turbulent Jesus hidden in the water. And my feeling would be that's the only way. It's the core way, the core thing that is necessary when it comes to approaching dreams. If nothing else, then this above all, this deep state of reverence. And that when we think about, the benefit we can get in our lives from engaging with our work, I think there's too easy a tendency to say, oh, what I need to do with that is, and then suddenly you apply your waking mind and your waking thought processes to picking this whole turbulent thing apart into a package that you can say, that's what it is, or this is what that looks like, this is something I can tell another person, etc., etc. And my feeling is that largely what you're doing there is killing the experience. And it's really unfortunate, because not only are you reducing what is such a profound and beautiful experience, but you're missing the point that if you want to extract benefit from the experiences, the first, and if pushed, the only thing to do is to say your prayer in the face of it. And it's too easy to feel like that just doesn't do anything. Like, well, it's a nice concept, and I say some sort of prayer, like, get down on my knees, or I whatever it is, however I construe prayer, that I do that, but that's not enough. That obviously this content needs to be understood linguistically and conceptually. And I just think that's wrong. And I think it's kind of the opposite of what's what's true. That understanding things linguistically and conceptually is inherently reductive. You might say, perhaps, that you concur with this, but that you also perceive dream interpretation as prayer. That is, a way of praying. But I don't feel comfortable with that, because I really feel that prayer has to do fundamentally with respecting the ineffability of something. And not just the ineffability, but the kind of transcendence of something. And so, if I have a dream, I'm trying to think of a good example, but let's take this example, that in fact the dream that I talked about with regard to this trip on my previous video, which is this rhinoceros that I dreamt about. And in the dream, it was hyper unusual. It was effectively a waking hallucination in which I was lying on my bed. Everything was normal except that this glowing, iridescent rhinoceros, who had started life as a normal dream object in a regular dream, was now floating, shining as this kind of translucent entity at the ceiling above me. I was lying on my bed, and as I watched, in full cognition, fully lucid, I saw the rhinoceros descending towards the bed as I myself levitated from the bed in hyper-realistic, and when we met in the middle, we merged into each other's body. I felt millimeter by millimeter the flesh of a rhinoceros physically integrating with my body until we were one. And then a bunch of stuff continued from there that became even more complex and transcendent than that phenomenon there. Now, let me catch my train of thought there. Right, so what I was getting at was this question of not just respecting the ineffability of something, but the transcendence of it. And that experience that I've just talked about had transcendent qualities in it that seemed to be pointing or speaking so clearly of something so far outside of normal waking reality, so much more important and so much more fundamental. A literal, kind of coming into pretty close contact with this sacred, turbulent Jesus. And the idea seems to be that I'm going to take that experience and then start to talk about what rhinos mean in the world and what this means about my relationships or my work or this or that or that. And I think that is exactly the opposite of respecting the transcendence of the state. I feel this way about psychedelic states as well, by the way, and I think a similar problem exists in psychedelic culture, where there's this, there can often be a desire to translate the experiences into the everyday, which seems to fly in the face of what is quite self-evident, and most people would completely agree with, that their experience they had was like so far outside of the everyday. That's what made it important and interesting. So yes, in the case of dreams, and actually I did raise the rhino dream. Each morning at the conference we had dream work circles, a consistent one for the entire week with the same group of people, and actually found that quite an interesting process, not from the point of view that I thought that the dream interpretation was a very, for me at least, kind of meaningful way to talk about dreams, but I thought that the mere fact of sitting in a circle of people and talking about unusual states of consciousness was socially interesting and relevant. I think it was interesting and useful to be in a conversation with people about the world and about our inner worlds, just to see how other people think about themselves and about the world. And many of those things being ideas or approaches that I may not have myself incorporated in the world yet. And so I felt that's actually like a really powerful reason to talk about dreams, and indeed to talk about them in a broadly, Jungian kind of analytical way. But any notion at all that that conversation is producing a tangible kind of definition for the dream, much less a definition which is the definition or the definition kind of intended by the dream. This is also an idea that I like very much. That was the message that was being delivered by something else. I find that really, really difficult to be comfortable with. Certainly not for myself. And again, to the extent that other people find this interesting and valuable, then that's fine. But I do think that some people may be missing some opportunities and undermining their own dream experience by rushing towards interpretation. And it was interesting. I came across something online a couple of days ago. It was an Australian who is involved in dream work, and I looked at their website, I think it was, and they were making a point of the idea that symbols, these symbol dictionaries, etc., that translate an idea from a dream into the waking world, that they're very limited and not very useful ways, etc. And of course, many people in dream interpretation do say that. They'll say, we can't be reducing this to these simple linear relationships with symbols. So there's a kind of acknowledgement that that's an uncomfortable way to consider things. And so I thought, this is interesting. This person at least has gotten that far, that they recognize the importance of not reducing things trivially to symbols, etc. But then it was noted that they appear fairly regularly on radio shows and things like this as the kind of resident dream expert. And when I looked up one such appearance, the whole thing was explicitly saying, if you dream about this, it normally has to do with this. And I can see the mass appeal of that, but if you have any integrity as someone who works with dreams, how are you possibly pushing that line? And if someone with very complex dreams is encouraged by that kind of content to analyzing their dreams in that kind of way, then I think that it really is an injustice, that you're misleading, you're misguiding them in the potential value that they can find in their dreams. And how do I sum that up in the end? Like what that value is, and I think it's that contact with the sacred is simply inherently healthful, and it's healthful precisely because of its ineffability, and any attempts to break it down further than that, you're starting to degrade the healthfulness of the experience. Now, that's not to say that it can have no tangible or definable influence on how you feel or think or act in the world. It's quite the opposite. I think that what do we mean by these experiences being healthful? Well, I think that they're having an effect on us physiologically and psychologically below the level of language, which I suspect is positive in the sense that it shapes our approach to the world in a way that will be more useful to the world, more compassionate to others, etc. And the conscious awareness of these dreams, and what we do pull away, and instinctively, obviously, we describe dreams in everyday words. We're forced to. I think that can initiate active processes of considering some deeper questions about being a human and how to do that well and lovingly. And that can be an active thought process. and an active discussion. But there too, that discussion is not helped by saying that rhino you dreamt of must have something to do with X, Y, and Z because rhinos have horns and are powerful and live in this such and such a habitat, etc. That's not what those experiences can potentially offer. They're pointing exactly in the opposite direction for me. They're pointing in the direction that the most important things in the world and the most important ways that you can, the most important structuring principles for being a loving, compassionate person and a self-loving and self-compassionate person in the world have nothing to do with these kind of straightforward definitions of truth, let's say. It's the recognition that actually the important things are the opposite of that, that we're misled in the world, like the trouble that exists in the world, in our lives, individually and as groups, resides far more in minds structuring unstructured sensation than it does in the opposite. So what we need more of is this kind of reverence and this engagement with sacred things in a way that's not trying to shape them. They're a lesson in the wildness of nature, and that maybe we could operate better in our lives personally and interpersonally and societally if we engaged more in that way, if we weren't so quick to try to define everything, and indeed so quick to be seeking truth. I mean, ultimately definition, it seems, is a process towards finding truth. But it's not difficult to see that truth, I mean, it's a complicated question, this, like, how do you define truth? And then once you come up with a definition, there could be various ways of looking at it, then how do you talk about how easily can we track towards truth or away from it? What's the value of finding truth, etc. But in one kind of simple, instinctive way to think about it, think of something like, I think this is a useful analogy because it's a pointy example that makes it fairly clear. You don't really need to actually closely define the idea of truth to realize what your answer to this question is. But let's say you love a person or you've loved a person, and someone said to you, okay, so we in order to understand the significance of this love and the nature of this love, and why you love this person and why you should continue to love this person or why you won't continue to love this person, what we're going to need to do is to define why it's true, like to define the truth of your love for this person. And anyone who's loved a person will immediately say, that's nonsense. That off the bat, we're going the wrong way here because love has nothing to do with truth. They're contrary concepts. And it's not to devalue truth, however we're going to define that. There's, we can find valuable ways to define that and to use truth in the world. But love, which most people would recognize as one of, if not the most important thing, whether that's, a simple view of love between two people or a more kind of all-expansive sense of love, everyone knows that love is a profoundly critical thing, kind of, and by definition, in a sense, the kind of the optimum thing. And everybody, I think, would also answer that question of, well, my love for my partner or my child, it doesn't have anything to do with facts and truth. And if it did, it wouldn't really be love. Like if I'm deciding to love this person based on an analysis, then that's not really what we're talking about when we're talking about really deep, abiding, complex, and sacred love, right? You can make active decisions towards learning to love a thing for pragmatic reasons, but that's a different kind of love. That really is a kind of utilitarian kind of love, and there's nothing wrong with that, you know, and compassion to some extent, at least at a certain end of the spectrum, when you're trying to come into a state of compassion for someone that you have no compassion for, it's very hard to. There is going to be a level of kind of wedging yourself into a constructed understanding of why you should love this person or show compassion. But you know, even then, the trajectory should be, you know, towards a more instinctive thing. But certainly in the case of natural love that occurs without you having to do anything because it's just there slapping you in the face, we know there's nothing to do with truth. And I think if we can recognize that, then we already have a kind of a signpost. So, okay, so super important thing, possibly the most important thing that's ever existed in the universe, and possibly you could argue some sort of organizing principle for reality, or at least for social reality. Love is something that's on the other end of the spectrum from conversations to do with truth and facts and X meaning, you know, X plus Y equaling Z and this and that, and analysis. And if that's true, then let's consider dreams and say, well, how different are dreams from love? You know, is your instinct, personally, my instinct is that dreams and love are very similarly placed. I mean, they're different ideas, they're different, but on this spectrum of like where their significance is and out of what their significance arises, it's very similar. It comes from, it just has nothing to do with truth or facts. And for that reason, I feel as if there's a real risk in dream interpretation. And now, not to say that everybody who does dream interpretation doesn't recognize things I'm saying here and takes their dream interpretation too far, but I certainly think some do, and there's a risk that the uninitiated would be easily misguided or misled into this kind of thinking. Now I forgot what I was going to say again. So I went on a little subordinate clause there to do with recognizing that not everyone's doing it this way. So yeah, I was saying that there's this risk in dream interpretation of really, you know, veering off into territory that is so far away from where it ought to be. In the same way that if you fell in love with someone and then someone said, okay, let's really nut this out and figure out why that is and whether that's justified, etc. If you bought that line and you went down that route, you'd probably end up, you know, ruining the whole thing. It's a little bit like that joke about the, you know, explaining a joke is like dissecting a frog. It's not very interesting, and you end up killing the frog. I think that's a humorous kind of analogy for it, that you end up potentially killing the frog here when you're too concerned with the so-called meaning of dreams, which I suppose it just makes me think that, in fact, a big part of this has to do with, well, one of the logical kind of implications of this is that I'm feeling more and more that the dream content itself isn't even that relevant in terms of the specific things that appear. It's not that they're not interesting and that you couldn't come up with creative ways to engage with those ideas and objects, etc., for the sake of creativity, you know, painting or writing or whatever it is. And obviously we think in terms of objects and structures, so it's useful to have things to pin our feelings to, and that where do we find our compassion, and okay, there was that dream that related to this, and you can frame things, but really I think there's so much value in those states purely on account of the state, the the nature of the states rather than the content of the states. And there's something emotionally encouraging I've found in my life. I think one of the most important influences of these complex dreams for me has been that just knowing that these states exist and that they can kind of occur within my system is quite wondrous, and particularly to the extent that very heightened states of emotions occur, whether they're difficult ones like terror or whatever, or these these extremely euphoric or loving, etc., states that can occur in dreams. They've been a reminder to me that it's not. I'm a person who's experienced an enormous burden of mental illness, and primarily amongst that, depression. And these states have been a reminder that my brain is not in, and who knows where all this stuff's coming from. Maybe it's not just the brain, but let's, for the sake of simplicity, my brain and my body are not incapable of feeling these things, of perceiving sensation in these beautifully complex ways. It's just that they're not doing it so much during waking consciousness as they used to. So I think prior to the last 10 years, maybe the 10 years prior to that, although I had many challenges, I still had some very kind of peaky states of awareness and consciousness and sensation and feeling in waking consciousness. And with the kind of progression of depression, a lot of that has kind of just fallen through, like just like a sieve. But the dream states are a reminder to me that, well, it's not impossible. Your body and mind are still well capable, and more capable than you even would have ever believed. So there's kind of various meta bases upon which I think dreams can be considered valuable. So I mean, I might leave the waffle here. I tend to self-deprecatingly refer to my discussion as waffle, but I think I've kind of said a few interesting things, and hopefully that's made some sense. I would be very interested to hear, obviously, if anyone's watching this, what you make of the things I've said. I'm certain that I definitely think that I'm probably missing some stuff around dream interpretation, and maybe overstating the extent to which people put the extent to which people invest in dream interpretation. So just because someone's doing dream interpretation doesn't mean they're not getting what I'm talking about, but nonetheless getting a lot of value out of their dream interpretation process. So, I'm open to hearing all of those ideas. But yeah, I'm interested to see what people think, what you make of what I'm saying, whether it's something that you've thought about, whether it's not, and it's now something that you feel would be meaningful for you to kind of think about or incorporate, where you think I might be missing something. Because yeah, this is very much a process of exploration for me. Like I said, I started this video just with this poem in mind and a vague idea, and I'd like to articulate it more closely. And yeah, and I would like on a future video to talk about, I think I definitely learned some interesting things about dreams that they're not exactly in the space of dream interpretation, but that they, well, yeah, I won't go into it, but just some practical things around working with dreams that I think may be quite powerful that I hadn't previously done, and I might have been slightly dubious about, but which actually I'm feeling like make some sense and possibly is starting to have some positive influence for me in terms of, I'm thinking of one example of dealing with a particularly difficult dream and some techniques involved with that. But we'll come to that another day. It's probably, I don't know how long I've been talking because I keep stopping and restarting the video to catch up on what the hell my brain's doing. But I want to extend my appreciation to you, fellow traveler, who's made it all the way to whatever minute this is in the video. It's impressive. My ultimate objective will be to find ways to talk about dreams that are not boring. Find non-boring way to talk about dreams, and I certainly will never talk about boring dreams. So yeah, thank you again. Do subscribe if you'd like to follow along, and I will hopefully see you in the comments and see you for another video very soon.